It is now time to do Lesson 11, a biography of the Earth. So this is going to be a detailed history of the Earth in terms of its biological and geological history. So this is going to correspond to Chapter 11 of your textbook. Now it's going to be very easy to get bogged down in all the facts and figures that I'm going to give you in this particular lesson. So it is very important that you read the lesson objectives. So this will help you to study for the exam over this material. So you should be able to explain, where did the Earth's atmosphere come from? Where did the Earth's oceans come from? What was the first type of life? Where did oxygen come from? Why did it take so long for life to colonize land? What was the first type of animal and plant life was? Why are reptiles and conifers, why did they dominate amphibians and ferns? Explain what killed the dinosaurs. Explain why mammals and flowering plants dominate reptiles. And then explain what causes the ice ages. So concentrate on these 10 learning objectives as we go through this material. So this just shows you if the history of the Earth was compressed into one calendar year, then when would all these events be occurring? You're not responsible for this on the exam. So you do need to know the age of the Earth. So we say that the Earth is approximately 4.6 billion years old. So you need to know that number. Okay, you need to know where the moon came from. So a collision of the Earth with an object about the size of Mars, it collided early in the formation of the Earth, and then that debris from that collision got into orbit and it collected and made the moon. Okay, you should know where the oceans came from. So that the oceans came from two different places. So you've got volcanoes, and then extraterrestrial material like comets and meteorites. So the oceans, volcanoes produce lots of water and carbon dioxide, and so that accumulated in the atmosphere, and then as the water condensed into a liquid, it rained onto the surface that formed the oceans. But also comets are composed of carbon dioxide and water, and so are meteorites. Now meteorites contain a small amount of water and a small amount of carbon dioxide, but if you have enough of them, that's a substantial amount of carbon dioxide and water. Okay, got to know what was the first kind of life on Earth. And so it was a bacteria that would have eaten the stuff that would have come out of underwater volcanoes. Okay, now this stuff here is interesting, but you're not going to need to know it for the exam about the continents that came before Pangaea. So you should know about Rodinia and Pangaea. Those are the two supercontinents that you should know about. So the next thing that is going to occur is that a different kind of bacteria is going to make an appearance. And so this kind of bacteria is going to be able to take carbon dioxide out of the air, and it's going to use that to make its body with. And so this is going to be very important, because a byproduct, the waste product of these organisms, was oxygen. So they ate carbon dioxide and water, and then they poop out oxygen into the atmosphere. So the atmosphere of the Earth begins to change. Okay, this is another supercontinent. Don't worry about it. Okay, this is another supercontinent. Don't worry about it. Okay, another thing that happened was the oxygen mixed with the ocean water and it rusted the iron. So there was iron dissolved in the oceans. It mixed with the oxygen being produced by these photosynthetic organisms, and it started to rust that iron, and it made layer after layer of rust on the bottom of the ocean floor. We call these red beds, and today we mine them to get iron. Okay, here's another supercontinent. Okay, so now here is the supercontinent that came before Rodinia. So there wouldn't have been any life on the surface of this supercontinent because there's no ozone layer yet. So the ozone layer protects us from radiation from the sun. So without an ozone layer, if there was any life on the surface of this continent, it would have been killed by that radiation. So there was life in the oceans because the oceans helped to shield the life from that radiation. So this would have been a barren supercontinent. Now the only reason why I mention Rodinia is that it blocked the ocean currents and created a colossal ice age. An ice age that was so bad that we think the entire surface of the earth was covered in ice. So we call this a snowball Earth when this happened. But very quickly it all melted. Okay, now in this series of videos, it shows how Rodinia broke apart, and then how Rodinia, how those parts came back together again to make Pangaea. So that's what this little video here is all about. Don't worry about the video, okay? The main thing I want you to get out of this was that the first life on Earth was the bacteria that ate stuff that came out of volcanoes. The second kind of life was the kind of bacteria that made oxygen. Okay, now so much oxygen is getting into the atmosphere now, it's forming an ozone layer, which means that life can crawl out of the ocean onto the continents and would be okay. So don't worry about any of these animals, but these are typical animals that would have been in the ocean during this period of time. Okay, and then again, don't worry about these organisms, but you should recognize crinoids. So if you live here in southern Missouri, in North America, there is lots and lots of crinoid pieces in our rocks. And so those crinoids were these things that they kind of look like a flower, but they were an animal, and they had tentacles that they would grab onto teeny tiny food particles and then put into their mouths. So that's what a crinoid is. Okay, now animals are starting to come up onto the land. So you're having your first land animals, and you're having your first land plants. And the first kinds of organisms, animals, that could exist on the surface of the earth would have been insects. So insects would have been the first stuff to come up out of the oceans to live on the land. Okay, then the next thing that you should notice is fish are appearing in the oceans. And you notice that the kinds of plants that are appearing on the land are getting bigger. Okay, so now we've got ferns and horsetails. But notice that ferns and horsetails, today, you only find them in wet environments. So in order for a fern or a horsetail to exist, it needs water. So the first animals and the first plants needed water in order to be able to survive. So that's why amphibians would have been the next thing to appear. Insects were the first thing, then the amphibians, which ate the insects. Okay, now the Carboniferous period, I think you should know about the Carboniferous period. If you're from Europe, we call it the Carboniferous. If you're from Missouri and North America, we call it the Mississippian and Pennsylvanian periods. Very important to southern Missouri. So southern Missouri would have been a ocean shoreline, and northern Missouri would have been a swamp. So that's why there's a lot of coal found in northern Missouri. So it formed during this period of time. Okay, let's not worry about the Permian, but notice that you have reptiles are starting to dominate amphibians. You should know why. So what advantage does first of all, what advantage does an amphibian have over a fish? The amphibian can crawl onto the land, okay, where it's safe. What advantage does a reptile have over an amphibian? Okay, it can lay its eggs on land. An amphibian has to lay its eggs in water. So a reptile has a self-enclosed shell that has water inside of it, so that its progeny, it's like it's living in water. Okay, then another thing you notice is evergreen trees like conifers. So they have an advantage over a fern because they have a pine cone. So their seeds are protected against the elements in a pine cone, whereas a fern, it's underneath the leaves and they're exposed. So better methods of reproduction. Okay, let's not worry about the Permian extinction, but let's now go into the Triassic period. And so now we're in the age of the reptiles. So do you remember that we talked about the Paleozoic? So the Paleozoic would have been all of this stuff. So from the Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Carboniferous, Permian, all of that would be the Paleozoic. And now we're going to go into the Mesozoic, which is going to be the age of the reptiles. So the reptiles have dominated the amphibians, and the reptiles have evolved into dinosaurs. And the dinosaurs keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Also notice you have your first mammals, but the mammals are very small and they are outcompeted by the dinosaurs. So the Triassic, Jurassic, and Triassic are all in the Mesozoic time period. And the dinosaurs keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but finally we have the KT event. So you should know what KT, so the K stands for Cretaceous, and this is a time period in which the asteroid hit the Earth. It blew so much dust into the atmosphere it blocked out sunlight. So without the sunlight, the plants died, and without the plants, the animals, the dinosaurs, began to die. Okay, now we're going to go into the Cenozoic. So during the Cenozoic, this is the age of the mammals. And notice that we got mammals, which have an advantage over reptiles in that a mammal carries its young in its body instead of laying an egg. This is also the age of grasses and flowering plants. They have an advantage over a pine cone and evergreen trees in that they have a fruit that covers the seed, and then that fruit can be eaten by an animal, and then the seeds can be pooped out somewhere else. So it's a better method of reproduction. And then the other thing I wanted you to notice is the ice ages. So roughly 2 million years ago, the Isthmus of Panama forms when North and South America come together. And that blocks the global ocean currents that triggers an ice age. Not as severe as the one that caused the snowball Earth, but it is severe enough that it covers the northern and southern hemispheres in a very thick sheet of ice that approximately every 10,000 years ago or so would thaw out, and then you'd have land again. But then in another 10,000 years, it would freeze over again. So for the past 2 million years, we've been having dry spells followed by very cold weather. Okay, and then here again is that geological time scale. So now if you go over it again, the information on there should make more sense to you. Okay, now as far as the geological things, I would like for you to know, how did the Appalachians form? Okay, how did the Rocky Mountains form? And then how did the Himalayas form? Okay, so of those three, which one is the oldest? So that's going to be the Appalachians. So the Appalachians form when North America hits Africa and it pushes up the Appalachian Mountains. Okay, then later you have the formation of the Rocky Mountains. The Rocky Mountains are the next oldest. That's a subduction thing. So part of an ocean plate was diving underneath the North American plate, and then material was coming up making volcanic mountains. So that's the Rocky Mountains. Okay, what about the Himalaya Mountains? So they're the youngest, so they've only been around for a few million years, and that occurred when India collided with Eurasia, and then that pushed up the Himalayan mountains. So I would like for you to know how those geological features formed. Okay, so don't really care about the future of the Earth, but you can look at those slides if you want to. Okay, let's take a break. And when we come back, we are going to do another series of lessons on geomorphism.